Welcome to the Sales Leader of Influence show. For sales leaders who lead with soul, spirit, and spine. In a world obsessed with tactics, this is the show for those who know leadership is personal. And here's your host, Bernadette McClelland.
And welcome to another week of the Sales Leader of Influence show. And what a great week the past week has been. It's interesting because I have asked two questions to different people this week. One is, how has your week been? And the other one is, how is next week looking? And it's really, really interesting because a couple of those answers, or most of those answers rather, I should say, have said last week was pretty ordinary. Last week was so-so. Last week was pretty crappy. Last week I lost a deal. I think you know where I'm going. But as far as what's happening for next week, how's that looking? Fantastic. Awesome. Full of opportunity. And this is the polarity, I guess. And this is the human being. We tend to look through life through two lenses. One is what's gone wrong, and one is what can go right. So it's the human spirit. And so for today, I actually want to take a bit of a deep dive into these two worlds, the polarity of scarcity and abundance when it comes specifically to sales leadership. And of course, the flow-on effect of that is the sales team. And the flow-on effect of that is the results. So I really want to take a deep dive into that and look at abundance from the space of sales leaders giving their team space and giving themselves space. But before I dive into that, I want us to think for a moment about scarcity. So when we look at scarcity, so I don't know if you have read Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. So one of his 7 laws of influence is the law of scarcity. And so if I was to kind of capture that in a nutshell for you, basically it's saying that if somebody wants something and you take it away from them, then they will want that even more. And so we've all responded to the law of scarcity. If it's like, 24 hours for this special, it could be 3 days left to get these tickets. And if you're a parent and you have tried to go through the checkout at a supermarket and the sweets are right there at the checkout, and your child wants a sweet and you say no, they kick up a tantrum. That is exactly why they have those products located right there, because it's playing into the law of scarcity. Now, scarcity sharpens our focus. So there's nothing wrong with scarcity as far as that's concerned. It sharpens our focus, and what it does is it helps us move quickly. It helps us make decisions. So we know that. However, in the world of sales, we have dangled those carrots or those sweets or those discounts or those last-minute tickets to our clients for so long that we have actually educated them. So what we've done is we've educated them to the point that they now know that they're the rules of the game. And so what many leaders out there, or many of us, and I'll kind of put myself into that kind of category as well, is that what it does is we are not aware that our buyers are as sophisticated as they are. Now, I kind of say that, we know that, but you think back to before the internet. A salesperson could go into an opportunity and just talk features, advantages, and benefits, and predominantly speak features. But because that prospect or that client or that buyer did not have access to enough information, or they weren't able to do any research, then they were at the beck and call of the salesperson. But now we know things have changed. And so in order for us today to be able to leverage the law of scarcity, it cannot be manufactured. And so I want to share an example with you. And it's my example, and it's one I've shared with a number of people over the years. And I'm just going to take you back a number of years to when I was a salesperson at Xerox in Melbourne in Australia. And my territory was the education department. Wasn't schools, it was higher education. And so one of my clients was a technical and further educational client, and I had been working with the print room manager and the director for about a year. And it was to replace kit in the print room. So the equipment in the print room wasn't just your typical $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 product. This was kind of like a big deal, $500,000 and upward. And so the equipment didn't change over every 6 or 12 months either. So the terms is usually 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 years. So my predecessors had been working on this. It was end of the financial year, and any of us in the sales role knows exactly what happens at the end of a month, end of a quarter, end of the financial year. It's get out there and close whatever you can close. And so I'd been working with these two guys for a year. My manager called me in and said, end of the financial year, let's close them. And let's dangle these carrots in front of them. His boss, his manager, called me in as well and said, right, where's the contract? Let's get this done. It's been going on for a little bit too long. Now, I drive out there. I have this appointment last day of the year, the financial year. And I've walked in and I've said, the pleasantries and all the rest of it. But inside my head, I was at odds with myself. I was in such conflict because part of me is saying, you got to get the deal. Not that they said it, but it was almost like a case of don't come back without it. And the other part of my brain was going, but you know these people. You know the way they think. They're conservative. You've been involved in conversations. You know where their mind is at. And you've dangled carrots throughout the year and they haven't bitten. So I was in conflict. And I've sat there. And I said to Don, I said, well, end of financial year, you guys know why I'm here. And I then said, but I'm not going to ask you to sign the contract. And the director leaned back and he looked at me and then he leaned forward and he said, I am so glad to hear you say that, Bernadette, because if you had closed me one more time, you would not have been given the opportunity. Now, I went back and I don't know what I said, but it was completely irrelevant because 2 months later, I replaced the kit that was in that print room. So not only did I give the competition a run for their money, and the competition was my ex-husband, but that's another story, I actually gave the buyer space. And so where I'm coming from here is that we can talk about scarcity and we can say, yes, FOMO, and we can drop discounts and we can do all of the carrot stuff. But it can't be manufactured. And I guess this is what I'm saying. I think we are at a point in time where we have moved, or we are definitely moving away from the industrial economy, where it was close the business, close the business, close the business at any cost. And sure, you can go out there and you can continue to close business. I'm not saying don't do that. And by the way, I just want to, I really just want to say to any sales leader out there, I am not advocating for your people to go out there and say, I'm not going to close the deal, I'm going to tear the contract up. This was a one-off. And this was me tapping into my intuition and my knowledge of the buyer. And so what happens is the leaders today at the end of the month, the end of the quarter, whatever it is, end of financial year, will say, go crunch, give them this. But whose process is that? That's ours. And yet these same leaders advocate for the buyer journey. So there is a real disconnection here. And so I guess what I want to say is that there is room for space, and it is a necessity, especially today, but not just for with the salesperson, with the buyer, but also with the leader, with the sales team. Now, I'm just going to kind of rewind a little bit again, because Cialdini, if you go back to Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, one of his other laws of influence is commitment and consistency. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, how do I go about bringing business in if I'm not going to use scarcity as a strategy? You can use abundance as a strategy. And I don't want this to sound soft either. So Cialdini's law of commitment and consistency is really all around creating very small and very congruent, and I really, really, really want to hone in on the word congruent. Very small, very congruent commitments that actually move our buyer towards small yeses. Now, you can say, well, that's kind of like a little bit of manufacturing or manipulation as well. But when you understand the psychology behind that, it's actually not. Because when you allow your buyer to actually buy into all of these smaller yeses, they actually feel in control. They're the ones that feel in control, and they're saying yes to the next step because saying yes matches their identity. It matches how they see themselves. And when a salesperson is in a sales conversation where that salesperson is also feeling totally congruent, well, then there's an energy match. But if you're going in to a sales conversation and you're manipulating or you are manufacturing scarcity and you are not congruent with that, in other words, this is kind of like I was, then that energy is going to transfer to that buyer, and they are going to sense some form of disconnection. They're going to sense a misalignment. They're going to sense desperation. And so the best thing that you can do is to completely shift the way you have these conversations. Now, the interesting thing is, who was it that says that we need to go in and dangle carrots or crack whips? Someone once said it and everybody's buying into it. Well, don't you think that it's about time that you actually had these conversations that aligned to who you really were? Because this is all about energy. And so, yes, sure, your strategy can be scarcity. That strategy is very transactional. Or your strategy can be abundance. And that strategy is extremely influential. So I wanted to kind of drill down a little bit today and kind of have this conversation. And if you're a leader and you're listening to this, and you're one of the leaders like I've had, and one of the leaders of salespeople that I've coached, or you might be a leader who understands that they are in this kind of world of control and they want to shift, then how that shows up is at the end of the month. And it's almost punitive. It's almost like, why haven't you got your numbers? Where are your numbers? Go out there and get your numbers. Close by Friday. We all know what I'm talking about here. So I'm wondering if you were to perhaps shift your approach. And if you were able to say to a buyer or a prospect, rather than close them on, end of financial year or end of month, and say like, if you sign by Friday, I can, shift that a little bit and kind of zone in on their journey and say something like, and I'm just kind of picking this off the top of my head, given that you shared with me that your timeline for making this decision is Friday week, if we were to align our framework for return on investment, or if we were to align our solution, does that keep you on track for your timeline? And that is such a more open, abundant way of moving the buyer down both paths. And it is so, I really don't like using the word authentic, but it is so congruent. It is so aligned if that's aligned with you. So I wanted to share that with you today. And I also wanted to share a statistic because I know some of you like data, and I wanted to go out there and think, well, okay, these are my thoughts. What's out there that kind of backs this up? And you can go and search, you can go and have a look at this if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper. But Deloitte have shared that when they look at sales cultures or sales environments that have leadership that is really more abundant, focused, or have more of an abundance approach where they give their salespeople space, compared to a leader who is scarcity, kind of has a scarcity approach, which we all know that scarcity at the bottom of that is fear and is ego, then the difference from a profitability perspective is 17%. They are 17% more profitable, and they are 21 or 23% more innovative when it comes to fresh new ideas. And so when you can give your sales team the space that I'm talking about you giving your buyer, then you will keep top talent. You will have more creative ideas flowing through that team. And what's more important is that if you don't, then all you're going to be doing is rehashing the same tactics that you've done the day before that you know doesn't work. So giving space, what does it mean? What does it look like? And how do we lead beyond scarcity? And I want to share 3 principles with you. And so within the Sales Leadership Academy, I have the Sales Leader of Influence method. And so there are 5 levels to the Sales Leader of Influence method. And they are you positioning yourself. They are you identifying a really high performing sales culture and building that. It is getting very, very clear on your revenue results and role clarity. It then moves up to how you coach, not just the deal, but the human, the beliefs, the behavior, and the business outcomes. And ultimately, it's how you present yourself out there in the marketplace. But if you can imagine concentric rings going around that pyramid, a couple of those, I guess, foundational elements are, you've probably heard, those of you that know me have heard before, it's deliberate disruption is one, you do new instead of you do you, and one of the others is the gift of the gap. And so the 3 principles I want to share come from what I call the gift of the gap. And it's that space between polarities. And it's that space where we can be neutral, or it's that space where we can play and experiment. And that's really, really important. And so the 3 principles I want to share with you, number 1 is space before strategy. And so when we talk about space, instead of like, let's go get the numbers, let's go crunch the deal, it's like, what are some of the opportunities that we can actually invite in? And I want you to listen to the language. So language is really important, because if you're saying, Bernadette, I hear what you're saying, but I've still got to get the numbers. ELT, I'm responsible to. The shareholders are the board, I'm responsible. I've still got to get the numbers. Well, we want to get out of that industrial economy where it's all about getting. And this is part of the reason people hate selling, because it's all about getting. So I'm going to suggest that you kind of start to shift your language and say, well, what are some of the opportunities that we can invite in? Because that, if you don't, then you fall into the scarcity trap. Secondly is trust over control. And so some of you leaders, as I've mentioned in a couple of these episodes already, because you've come from sales, there's that kind of control, because some of your self-worth is wrapped up in your team's results. And so if you think about trust over control, give your people space. We all know what it's like to kind of grip hold of a roller coaster or a ride or something, absolutely, geez, I'm frightened to death. Like, that shows up in our body. And so if you're a leader who is living in a scarcity mindset and you're controlling, but you may not realize you are, by the way, your intention might be absolutely spot on, but your energy is controlling, then please loosen up a little bit. And instead of focusing so much on the activity and the dials and the meetings and all of that, just give some space. Get together on a Friday afternoon and brainstorm some different ways of thinking, or give your people some space before in between their meetings maybe. Let them power down in order to power up. And so when you can focus on something bigger than the activity, and you can focus on your priorities and your responsibilities, that creates a different energy. And so the third is coach the energy, not so much the activity. Yes, still coach the activity. I'm not saying don't do that, because we need to do that. And we need the data, and we need to know the ratios. We need all of that. But if you can coach the energy of your sales team when it comes to beliefs, when it comes to behavior, and when it comes to business outcomes, and instead of sitting down and just talking about, so what are we doing with the deal? What's the numbers? Speak about who is going to show up in that next meeting. What part of your salesperson needs to step up? What part needs to expand? So here's the thing, energy can attract or energy can repel. And at the end of the day, if you are a leader and you are living in scarcity, then you're going to be repelling your team to a degree. And then if your team are taking that out to the market, then they are going to be repelling opportunities. So I wanted to share that with you today. And I guess just to finish up with is to say that the smart leaders know the difference. I just want to say that. You might think that listening to this is a little bit soft, but I'm letting you know it is your competitive advantage. It absolutely, positively is your competitive advantage. So I am going to give you a challenge. I am going to suggest 3 things. Take your pick. Choose your poison. In the next week, I'm going to suggest that you find, you've got it, 30 minutes, and mark that on the calendar for you. And I know some of you will be thinking, I just don't have the time. Time, you make time, okay? You choose what you do with your time. It's not about time, by the way, it's about momentum. That's how you go vertical. That's how you go to market faster. So I'm going to suggest that you carve out 30 minutes and that you give yourself space. Like I'm talking real space. And think and contemplate and reflect. Secondly, I am going to suggest that you ask your sales team different questions. So instead of asking them about when the next deal is or when they're going to close, ask a question such as, what's the new idea that we could try if fear didn't show up? Expand the thinking. And third, I'm going to get you to observe yourself. So we can't read the label from outside the jar. So we don't know how we show up. I have no idea how I show up unless I sit there and reflectively look at myself and picture myself on another chair and watch myself do what I do. So I'm going to suggest that you sit on a park bench, pretend that you're sitting on another park bench, and observe the way you lead. And I want you to look for any form of scarcity. And then I want you to change it. So this has been around how to lead beyond scarcity. I am inviting 7 aspiring leaders to join me in the Sales Leader of Influence circle. Sales Leader of Influence is all about driving revenue, it's expanding your influence, and it's building wealth. And it works not just on how you lead and the hard skills and pipeline and people and process and positioning, but it also weaves in how you are being and becoming. So I'm going to suggest that you go to salesleaderofinfluence.com, have a look there, and if you want to apply or message me, I would love to have you join me in September. And on that note, for the next week, I hope it's filled with potential and possibility and abundance. And I would encourage you to continue to lead with soul, spirit, and spine. And on that note, have an amazing week. We'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching the Sales Leader of Influence show with your host, Bernadette McClelland. See you next Wednesday live at 5 o'clock Eastern.